people are disappearing. There's also mass graves reports.
What's the actual protest situation?
It's a military state right now, so they're not allowing people to come out of their houses.
People go outside, that's when they're getting arrested and shot.
They went out as entire families and they said goodbye at the door. This is very much a people's revolution.
We're receiving credible reports that they're removing organs of people. Probably one of the reasons is to remove any evidence of sexual torture, trying to make money by some sort of illegal organ trade.
And I've been trying to get media to cover it initially, even with the few deaths and the stories that came out.
Who did you try?
I've tried everyone in the UK. I think one of the biggest challenges is language barrier and access to Iran to reporting.
And stopped them with Gaza, did it?
That's a very good point. I can't debate that. The regime has a very strong lobbyist group in the UK and obviously also in Washington, D.C. These groups have been built and they've been organised for years to control these narratives.
And or reading about, mercury being injected into Iranians so that they die not on the day but 2 days later, so they skew the statistics.
I have to see the images and obviously share them with media. I have to see 3-year-olds with a bullet in their body. It's very tough.
Do you want the Americans to strike, or do you want this to be just an internal revolution, or do you want Pahlavi to come back? What do you want to see?
I think this is one of the most important questions.
Hello, and thank you for joining us on The Brink. I'm Andrew Fox.
And I'm Jake Wallace-Simons. Now, with the death toll in Iran soaring above 30,000 and the mainstream media largely ignoring the story in sharp contrast with the war in Gaza, we thought we'd spend some time getting into the details of what's really been going on, why it's happening now, and what's coming next.
One of the remarkable aspects of the uprisings has been how it's been driven not by politicians, celebrities or militants, but by ordinary, everyday young people who have been facing imprisonment, torture, blinding, execution and massacres in the streets, all for the sake of freedom.
Those brave, ordinary people in Iran have been supported by ordinary Iranians in the diaspora, who've been working day and night behind the scenes to wake the world up to what's really happening to their friends and relatives in the Islamic Republic. And we're delighted to be joined by two such people today.
Atbin Moayedi and Haleh Blake, two British Iranian professionals, have been working flat out to get the truth out there on social media by working with journalists and organising demonstrations. Both have lost friends in the most appalling circumstances at the hands of the regime and have been threatened by the Ayatollah's henchmen themselves.
Before we dive in, we're introducing a new benefit only for our paid subscribers, an exclusive, interactive question and answer session with Andrew and myself on Substack live every month. The first one's coming up this Saturday at 7 p.m. UK time, which is about, 2 p.m. East Coast time. So log on and ask us anything you like, whether it's about Gaza, Iran, Minnesota, Greenland, or Aston Villa. And if you haven't become a paid subscriber yet, now's a fantastic time to do so, as our first month free offer lasts only until the end of January. Sign up now at thebrinkpodcast.substack.com, New Year trial, and see you on Saturday evening.
And if you're enjoying our podcast, please don't forget to like, subscribe, share it, and do leave a comment, as we love to know what you think. And if you're listening on audio, please give the podcast 5 stars. And if you're still hitting that irritating paywall, as Jake said, now would be a great time to subscribe with our January offer.
Now, without further ado, we present Atbin Moayedi and Haleh Blake on The Brink. Well, Haleh and Atbin, thank you for joining us on The Brink.
Thanks for having us, Jake.
So if we start off by looking at what's happening in Iran right now, because the media coverage has been pretty muted over the past few weeks when people have been sacrificing their lives for the sake of freedom. What's going on right now?
So far, the reports are saying that over 30,000 Iranians have been killed, and that's the protesters as ordinary people who took on the streets on the 8th and 9th of January. That was after the call of the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, who called upon the nation to come out, who did in all 31 provinces. That's all aspects of the society and all segments of the society. And those who have been killed are from 3-year-olds all the way to grandmothers in their 70s.
3-year-olds?
Yes. So that really displays the extent of this movement, and it's all ages. and all segments of the society.
And you know people personally, don't you, who've been killed, arrested, disappeared, and you've been trying really hard to get their names and stories out there.
Absolutely. So almost every other Iranian family we know has had someone lost. So this really shows the extent of the massacre that happened on those 2 days. People are disappearing. There's also mass graves reports that The Guardian actually published this week. There are arresting people on the streets, stripping them, and if there are any pellets or bullets on them, they get arrested. There are phone checking
Bullets
stations.
as in what, in the left?
Pellets. If there's any injuries on their bodies, they are arrested.
Right.
They're stopping people on the streets and checking their phones, going through all the contacts. And of course, we still have the blackout of internet on the streets. And we are trying to get their voices out, get the truth out.
And what about the protests themselves? So obviously, before the blackout, we all saw the videos of people on the streets. And then, of course, it went quiet, less a few videos that managed to get out through Starlink. Are protests still ongoing, or have they died down in number? What's the actual protest situation?
It's a military state right now, so they're not allowing people to come out of their houses. So they cannot protest whilst, they have a military state. It's a bit like North Korea right now. So
the country's in total lockdown.
It's in lockdown.
Martial law.
Yeah.
And if people go outside, I presume that's when they're getting arrested and shot.
Correct.
Is that nighttime only, or is it daytime as well?
It's daytime as well.
Okay. So total shutdown of the whole
shutdown.
country.
Schools are shut.
And we've seen, some of it's not just people going out onto the streets and being massacred. It's also people being pursued in very intimate daily ways, isn't there? I've seen some videos. There was one of a guy trying to hold a door closed while his friends hid, and then the regime thugs bursting in. There's been footage of regime thugs going into a hospital where protesters are lying, recovering, and just shooting them in the head one by one. They're in your life, aren't they? In Iran?
It's an indiscriminate stamped down suppression on these protesters, because it's a universal liberation movement. It's a civilian uprising of people from all provinces and cities in Iran, of all ages, of all genders, and therefore the response of the regime has been indiscriminate.
Yeah.
So they're going from house to house, door to door, checking people for injuries, or checking people for signs of bullets, or checking people's phones. Do they have any videos that they've taken or footage that they've taken when they've been to protests? I know people who try to cross the border overland from Iran to Turkey, and the Turkish police has arrested them and then handed them over to the Iranian authorities, and they've gone into even their recently deleted folder. And like you said, they're going into hospitals, not only killing, executing patients who have signs of injury from protests, and they're often marked because they target their genital area or their eyes. So people who have been blinded, or people with other clear signs, they know that they've been to the protests, and even doctors and nurses and hospital staff have been arrested and are up for execution for treating these people.
You talk about some stories of the people that you know personally, and what's been going on with them.
I know one case, and this is a family of a friend who I've known for 20 years, and they went to protest, and they came out with rashes and blisters all over their bodies. They've seen a doctor and who said this is not from tear gas, so this is chemical weapons being used, or some type, because it's not tear gas material. It doesn't cause that reaction. I've also have again friends' family who was killed in Gorgon, where they brought out machine guns to unarmed protesters. And every day I'm actually hearing of more deaths amongst us as we're getting more information from inside Iran.
And in terms of the executions that, people who've been arrested, obviously Mr. Trump was reassured that they had been stopped. Clearly that's not the case, I'm assuming. Have you heard of people getting executed in the prisons as well?
Yes. Erfan Omidwari was one that came out that he was up for execution. The news from inside is that he was executed. There's no bodies handed over yet, so that these executions are happening in silence and in blackout.
And it's not just a case of what they're doing, in life to these people, or ending their lives in that indiscriminate criminal manner that in which they're doing those things, but it's also what's happening after death. We're receiving reports, credible reports, that they're removing organs of people, that they are removing, they're performing uterectomies, they're removing the uteri of women. Probably one of the reasons is to remove any evidence of sexual torture, which is one of a historic tool that the regime has used to as part of their suppression. And this is a thing, and at the same time they're charging families. I think well reported that they're charging families not only to receive their bodies back, thousands of pounds, but 5,000, yeah. And the same amount for the bullets used. So this is part of the regime, and I'm sure we'll come to that later, but it's a mafia regime. They are trying to, whether it be extracting and embezzling the wealth of the country, but also now trying to make money from the families, from grieving families, or trying to make money by some sort of illegal organ trade. So we're seeing, these are people in the highest echelons of evil and cruelty that we're dealing with, that people like us who have grown up in a free and democratic society can hardly fathom.
Well, that's the next thing we wanted to ask. It's wonderful that you're here speaking to us, and we're trying to fill the massive void, or you contribute a little bit towards filling the massive void that's been left by it seems like the mainstream media doesn't really care very much. It's been, on the day where Time magazine published that story that 30,000 people had been killed, I went through the BBC website and the Sky website. I took a video on my phone of their sites. It didn't mention it at all.
No.
I have been trying to get the news out from the first day of protest because we knew straight away this is the moment we've been waiting for. We knew this was going to be different. And I've been trying to get media to cover it initially, even with the few deaths and the stories that came out. They weren't really interested.
Who did you try?
I've tried everyone in the UK. 700 contacts of all the major media.
So newspapers, broadcasters,
everyone,
left, right, Guardian,
everyone.
Daily Mail, Telegraph, Times, BBC, Sky.
We have managed to cover since obviously the new year. I think one of the biggest challenges is language barrier and access to Iran to reporting.
Didn't stop them with Gaza, did it?
True, but I think that's a very good point. I can't debate that. But it's there is
what lies behind it?
Pushback.
It's part of the sort of tentacles of the status quo of the political and financial elite. I think if you look at the current status quo, what financiers and politicians like is certainty, and anything that can destabilize that certainty, which liberation of Iran and the removal of the Islamic Republic would result in at least as temporary uncertainty, in particular if there's military action in the region. That uncertainty would spill into financial markets, into oil markets, because of the importance of the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf and those countries. But also if you look at, the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, so the 6 Gulf Arab states like the UAE and Saudi, but also Turkey, who do influence politics and therefore the media in this country. They're opponents of any sort of targeting or of the Iranian regime by military strikes or any other ways, because of the competition that they would face as a result of a free Iran. These countries that I've mentioned, the Gulf countries, they despise the Islamic regime, but they would despise a free Iran that trades with the West and sells oil to the West and is friends with Israel even more. So
why is that?
Well, money at the end of the day. It's Iran is has the second largest natural gas reserves in the world, the fourth largest oil reserves. It's a top 5 or 10 producer of aluminium, iron ore, lead, copper, zinc, as well as other sort of non-metallic minerals like salt. So, this is a country that should be in the top 10. The GDP, the economic growth in the years leading up to the revolution in 1979 was 9.1%. And now it's, less than 1. So you're looking at a country that would return to the global economy in a way that we haven't seen before, perhaps since the fall of the Soviet Union. And it would be destructive to the business interests of the other countries in and around Iran.
In fact, we were talking about this last night, that, also politically speaking,
yes.
Certain repressive regimes in the Gulf who might be Western friendly, semi-Western friendly, but still aren't democratic, must have some concern that if there was a democratic revolution in Iran that resulted in the fall of the regime and the establishment of a Western friendly democracy, that might happen to them too. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, and but Saudi Arabia is already struggling with oil prices where they are.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you get a glass of Iranian oil reaching the market because there's a free Iran, that's going to bring the price of oil even further down, which is really going to hurt Saudi Arabia. They're already scraping the barrel for cash.
Exactly.
So, there's definite vested interest here. And of course, the gas with Qatar as well, they're going to be, severely impacted by an increase in free Iranian gas on the market.
And you reckon that leads to pressure on newsrooms not to cover it? Is that what you're saying?
Well, direct, at least indirectly. If you look at it, the leaders of these countries. We already know that bin Salman has been lobbying against the US for doing
That's
any
the Saudi
strikes.
leader.
The Saudi leader, and he's there was an FT article yesterday published that said that he's also having meetings with the Iranian authorities to try to diffuse tensions. Now, if you look at if politicians are the head, then financiers are the neck. And the financiers will be controlling those politicians to some, or influencing. Controlling is too strong a word, but influencing,
Lobbying,
exactly. And the current status quo is profitable to certain parties, and I don't mean political parties. I mean entities or groups of people. And any change to that will lead to uncertainty, which will change the money flow. So if you look at it at a chain, you look at those neighboring countries and their leaders who will be influencing politicians here, in particular in Europe, because we've seen the Americans, the Republicans in particular, Fox News and Rupert Murdoch's sort of entities have been conveying some of the messages and in support of the liberation of Iran and against the regime. But that's about as far as it goes. So it's this whole idea of uncertainty being and profitability and the status quo being dressed up as risk aversion.
Yeah, I don't know. Obviously, I'm a journalist and I've worked in newsrooms, and I find it difficult to imagine a top-down order saying don't cover the Iranian what's going on in Iran. I think it's a combination of things. It's a sort of culture. It's a cultural blindness. It's often underpinned by an assumption of what people want to read, what people should be educated in reading or seeing. And I think that some of it perhaps has got to do with Israel and Gaza. There was such an obsession on Israel and Gaza because it fitted particularly. Let's take the BBC as an example, because it's easy to talk about the BBC because it should be impartial because it's funded by the taxpayer. That's cultural. There's a culture there that thinks that's really important, that everyone has to know it's the biggest scandal in the world. And yet Iran, it's sort of...
Well, we saw similar with Sudan, of course. Massacres, certainly in areas like Darfur, that were far worse than anything that was happening in Gaza. And yet there was almost complete silence about it. Ditto Nigeria, where we've seen the killings of not only Christians, but also Muslims in huge numbers in the north of Nigeria. And again, silence, and almost nobody even knows about it, never mind have it reported on by the press. So there seems to be this unique obsession in the Middle East with one particular region where they're clearly ignoring the horrors and the atrocities that you've just described to them.
And when it comes to Iran, the government has been far more condemnatory and far more aggressive in its language towards Israel over the past couple of years than towards the Iranian regime. The Iranian ambassador has not been expelled from London. The Ayatollah's office has not been closed. The IRGC has not been proscribed. And yet he's recognized Palestine, given statement after statement condemning and slamming Israel. What do you want to see from the... I mean, you must be desperate about the lack of support you're getting from officialdom towards...
The regime has a very strong lobbyist group in the UK and obviously also in Washington, D.C. These groups have been built and they've been organized for years to control these narratives, including the Gaza situation that we witnessed. They were entirely pro-Gaza, escalating all the news and pushing media. And they've been working for 47 years. So we may be doing this for 3 years, but they have done this for a long time and they've got great influence, and they had great influence in Biden's administration, and they're still trying to, for example, influence Trump's administration.
There was a spy scandal, wasn't there, with Biden?
Yes, there was. Yeah. And they continues to be. So we are ousting them as we can. For example, NIAC, which is a national Iranian council in the US, is actually a lobbyist group. The brother of the founder was ousted by the Swedish government, that he was in direct contact, and he was lobbying for the regime. So these are very known networks to us, but to the outside, to journalists who are not focused on Iran, they don't understand how it works. So it does cause a confusion. So when we come out and say, we estimate, because we hear from the ground, this is going to be above 50,000 deaths, they come back and said, no, it's only 200. Look at all these security guards that have been killed. Then you have BBC, who reports the first death was a security officer. His name was Amir Hassan Khodayari Fard, who was actually a protester, who the regime made his father confess that he was, on a forced confession, that he was a security guard, and issued him with a Basiji militia card. But at his funeral, he came out and said, my son was a protester and I want revenge. So
you're saying the BBC reported regime propaganda?
Yes, and they only reported on from Mizan, which is the judiciary website. I have written to the writers. I've escalated it. Apparently it's gone to senior editors. I emailed them again last week, and there's no action. They haven't corrected that piece. And the regime continues to do this. So if you can't pay that bullet money of 5,000 USD, which is more than 2 years of work of an average worker, many families can't afford it, then they issue them a card and they count it as security officer for the regime.
I mean, this all sounds so familiar, doesn't it? I mean, and I saw a clip just today, a CNN reporter in Tehran, I don't know if you saw this, reporting on the ground in Tehran.
Iran's leadership is sending a very strong and defiant message to the United States, and specifically, of course, to the Trump administration. You could see it here on this gigantic poster on Revolution Square in central Tehran. The message on this massive poster is, if you sow the wind, you will reap the whirlwind. Obviously meaning, if the United States attacks Iran, Iran will retaliate in a massive way, which could, of course, lead to a major military confrontation.
It was like watching regime propaganda. He was saying, look at this massive display. There was a big poster behind him that if you reap the whirlwind, you'll sow whatever it was, regime slogans. Saying, look, they're ready for war. This could be awful for America if the regime hits back hard. He did a few vox pops interviewing people that were all pro-regime. I mean, it was I couldn't believe what I was seeing with my own eyes sometimes.
Yeah, we witnessed that. And if you look at all the comments underneath, you do see angry Iranians who've lost families, who they cannot even reach their families, are commenting and saying, you missed 30,000 families who were killed. You missed the phone stations. But I do know how they operate. There's an agency that takes these journalists and gives them the promise of access to ministers' interviews, like Araghchi, and they give them promises and ask them to do specific tasks, whether it's not to report on Iran for a specific time, or The Guardian allowing Araghchi writing opinions pieces.
Yeah.
In the same breath, I know The Guardian, Deepa from The Guardian, she writes extensively on Iran. She ousted the they're the mass graves. So you do have some really invested individuals and journalists who are going to the end, but generally the organizations are at fault here for not recognizing that they're actually legitimizing the regime rather than reporting. There's a really real difference here in journalism versus legitimization, and the regime is buying legitimization through CNN's reporting.
So just as we saw with Gaza, the world's press is getting played by a regime that has a vested interest in making sure only their narrative reaches the mainstream.
This is somewhat idealist, but it's all now when what we're seeing, like I've said, a universal liberation movement that touches upon every single right that a decent human being should care about, whether it be women's rights and a movement against female apartheid, or LGBTQ rights, or the rights of civil rights for whether it be immigrants or minorities or religious minorities, like
it's freedom,
like the Baha'is. It's
freedom is what it boils down to.
It's a struggle for freedom for all aspects and corners of society. And what people need to ask themselves, who are part, whether it be people in the media, whether it be activists or protesters who have just turned up on a Saturday on Trafalgar Square waving whatever flag, they need to ask themselves, where do they want to be when history writes about the truth about what happened? And I know this is idealist, but you have different factions. You have people who are standing up for what is right, whether they're Iranians or non-Iranians. You have people who are silent, who aren't silent on other issues, some of which we've touched upon now, and the hypocrisy of that. And then we have those who are standing in the way. And all of those people need to ask themselves, where do they want to be when history looks at this? Because Iran will be free. It will happen. I know. I believe it will. And if you look at history, Iran is the oldest nation in the world, 2,500 years of being a continuous nation. We've been invaded by Mongols, by Turks, by Arabs, by Greeks, and our culture has remained and our language has remained. And what we've seen is that all dictatorship and authoritarian theocracies in this case, they will come to an end, whether it be because of the age of the supreme leader and his cronies in the regime mafia, or because of the unsustainable pressure, economic or civil, that's been placed on the Iranian people. The regime is on a countdown, and Iran will become free. I believe that, and based on, of course, a degree of wishful thinking, but also based on history and the facts and the current situation. So when Iran becomes free, and the people of Iran are free and become part of the world again, whether it be in industry or trade or literature and arts, history will be written. And those who stood on the wrong side or didn't take a side at all, they'll be remembered. And usually they pop up.
If I was one of you two, I would hate Angelina Jolie, Amal Clooney, Gary Lineker, all the other numerous celebrities and public figures and UN officials and diplomats and politicians and NGO workers and journalists and so on, who have said nothing about this, the worst massacre in modern times, as far as I can tell, and yet filled their boots day after day on social media, preening about Israel's just war in Gaza.
I would say, okay, if they're silent is one thing, is those who are silent but against us is another. You've got Huda Beauty with 57 million followers who's burning Reza Pahlavi's images. This is the people that came out on the streets because of his call. And us Iranians, I personally say that I trust him to transition us to a democracy and to ballot boxes. And that's what we are all asking for of him at this point. And to do that and not burn Khamenei's photo, who's massacred millions of Iranians since 1979, I just think that's atrocious.
And who is this with this?
Huda Beauty.
Okay.
She's got a beauty brand.
Right.
Large influencer.
Middle Eastern descent. I'm not sure what
she's Iraqi.
Yeah.
And considering Iraqi militia was sent into Iran to massacre Iranians, this seems in a different format.
Well, to your point about hating those people that you've mentioned. I don't personally. I don't feel any hate. It's disappointment, but it's also, we know what the reality is. We know that this is the case. We know that that the media, most of the media, or a large part of it, is not in support of the Iranian people for one reason or the other. But it's also, the key is, for anyone who's listening who has been silent or hasn't said anything, or done something as small as sharing a story on social media. And I speak for myself, somebody who grew up in the West Country. I went to all of my friends from school and university are sort of white English, and I would say that almost about 2 or 3 of them have said something or shared something on social media, and a lot of them have, said other things about other causes, but not in particular this one. But my point is, it's never too late to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And if we look at, this is perhaps the nerd in me, but if we look at Tolkien, if we look at Grima Wormtongue from Lord of the Rings, he betrayed the people of Rohan. But then in the end, he did the right thing by helping bring down Saruman.
That's a pretty obscure reference.
Yeah, I'm always here for a Tolkien reference.
But I think we can learn a lot.
Wormtongue. I've read Lord of the Rings more than once.
Take Darth Vader, for example.
Okay,
he did the right thing. He did the right thing at the end. Even though he had made all of those atrocities beforehand. So my point is, and forgive me for thank you for indulging me in that nerdy reference. But my point is, we can learn a lot from both history and literature, and it's never too late to do the right thing. So I don't think anybody who has been silent or not said anything needs to be ashamed, because just join us and raise the voice, because you're fighting for the 3-year-old who was shot when she was going with her dad to the pharmacy, or friends that we have who were shot during the day on the way to the corner shop to pick up some bread. They were shot in the day in Iran, and I know this myself. I personally.
I think I'd like to speak to you more about the Iranian people themselves, because obviously it's not a major tourist destination. It's not somewhere most people have ever been. All they've really seen of Iran is what they see on the news.
Since 1979.
Of course.
Before then,
if they're older than me, they may have gone on holiday to Iran, but if they're my age or younger, not a chance. So people don't really know much about Iranian people at all. I mean, obviously it's Persian rather than Arab. But there's a lot of diversity in terms of ethnicity in Iran.
One of the most natively ethnically diverse countries in the world, if not the most, in terms of the number of languages and races and colors and creeds and religious beliefs that we have in Iran. And that comes from, and that, forgive me for interrupting you, but this is something I'm very passionate about, but also something that's very key to why people who aren't Iranian should care about this, because Iranians are inherently, we are proponents of liberty, harmony, and peace and tolerance, and we're generally very secular people. And this comes from our origins as Persians, as from the Achaemenid Empire. So we're talking 2,500 years ago, when Cyrus the Great, who we all consider the Great Father, wrote the first Bill of Human Rights in 539 BC, when he liberated the Judeans, the Jewish people, and many others from Babylon. He wrote this Bill of Rights to declare and proclaim that all minorities and all languages and all religions have a place in the Persian Empire and are protected by the emperor. And he funded, for example, the rebuilding of the Temple of Solomon, right? Yeah, Temple of Solomon. So this idea, and that, a lot of people think, okay, that's history, that's your past, but we are still, as Iranians, incredibly connected to our past. The language is still the same. We just speak Persian, or modern Persian rather than Old Persian that they spoke at the time. It's still the same language. And those values and principles of tolerance, of harmony, of acceptance and warmth towards the other is still very much there. So having a free Iran, having Iranians back on the global scene who can travel freely and don't have to request a visa for every single country other than certain countries in the nearby area in Iran. The Iranian passport was, before the Iranian Revolution in 1979, one of the most powerful passports. The world will benefit from having Iranians back on that scene, whether it be just from arts and creativity, but in particular from things like education and science, technology, engineering, and maths, in which Iran has the second largest population of STEM graduates in the world per capita, and the fifth largest by total number after countries like China, Russia, India, USA, who have populations that far outnumber Iran. So it is in the interest of anybody who truly cares about the progression and the prosperity of the human race and the planet. And I don't say this as somebody who's biased. Of course, I care a bit more by virtue of being Iranian. But if you look at the facts, whether you're a feminist who is silent at the moment, but you care about things like tampon tax, which are important issues, but you will want the liberation of Iranian women in which there are more female STEM graduates than there are men. And we in Europe have a problem with not enough women in STEM, just as an example.
It's funny, I mean, the parallel between the ancient civilization of the Persians and the Jews is, you can't escape it listening to you talking about the history.
Yeah.
No, we've met a few times in history as a whole, but also why I find that the benefits of us merging into the world is that there's also financial benefits to the West. I think that's really not been highlighted well enough, like you touched based on the cost of oil, the competition with Saudi. That direct beneficiary will be Europe. So I think that really hasn't been highlighted enough, because the integration, getting higher skilled, human resources coming from Iran or exchanging between both would be an opportunity, but also trade. Also, global terrorism is what the Islamic Republic has taken part in, and investing, that will diminish. So I think there's many benefits to the UK, and I think this is sometimes certain people, when they're quiet, it may be because they've got that anti-West idea that, if they stay with the Islamic Republic, they bring down the West, and that yes. idea that's why some people are silent, in my view. And that probably needs to be addressed a little bit more, because they then see the Islamic Republic as the oppressed rather than the oppressor. But what about the Iranian people who are suffering very clearly? And that's our reality. And I think the people with that sort of vision that actually are so removed from our reality and our life, they are the true example of white privilege, where they sit on a higher moral ground and make decisions on our behalf. And sometimes some actually find that they find it extremely difficult speaking about a brown oppressor just because of color. That in itself is a barrier some can't seem to break, which is clearly problematic.
I think people are very scared to criticize the other side for fear of being, whether it be cancelled or seen as being racist or anything like that. And we see it. You see it in gatherings and drinks that I have with friends who are sort of, white British, and they really mince their words, because
they can't say the Ayatollah is a murderous tyrant because he happens to be Muslim. I mean, what the hell?
Or they're fearful of being called Islamophobic, and there's this increasing argument now that the word Islamophobia in itself is incorrect, because
it's being used by these guys, by these extremists, to stop you from criticising them.
I'd like to just keep on the topic of the people of Iran a little bit, just to try and bring this to life for people watching this. Now, we've spoken about how we all hope Iran will be free. We've spoken about this kind of high watermark of brutal, murderous oppression. But just going back slightly in time before the protests started, what's day-to-day like under this regime in Tehran at the moment? Your average Iranian in the country, how are they oppressed on a day-to-day basis by the regime when they're not being shot at in the streets?
And you two have been to Iran, haven't you? So you can talk from your personal...
We have. I think Haleh very, very well placed. I can talk about some of the economic factors, but Haleh is very, she hears a lot of voices every day. You're a representative of the voices.
Oh, well, I was born in Iran. I went to school until high school, and then migrated here because my parents didn't want their daughter living in that environment. So living in a school and being given a headscarf and being told I was different to my brothers, that was daily life, and that continues to be to this day, because wearing a headscarf and this outfit and your uniform in school is part of the rules. So even though, for example, women were defying the rules since 2022, the women's movement, kids as young as 6 and 7 have to wear a headscarf to go to school, at universities, at governmental buildings, and they get harassed.
There's incredibly severe punishments if they don't.
There are heavy fines, punishments, harassment, belittling, swearing, all of those elements. But so that's the women's side. But this is beyond women's problems, because women were a segment that were created to just divide these. It was almost the whole idea of conquer and divide. So if you divide the girls with the boys, treat them separately, it was done very systematically. So that's obviously one element, but the actual root cause is the regime itself, and it's greed of sucking all the resources of of Iran, and instead of investing in infrastructure, they're exporting it to terrorist organizations abroad. So we know that how much they're paying, for example, Hezbollah or Hamas or Houthis, and that people are exposed to that. The value of our currency has dropped by 99% since their inception. The sanctions, of course, have an effect, but the reason the sanctions had actually come in was because of the hostilities of the regime, like taking 66 hostages in the November of 1979. That was literally 6 months after coming into power. And then follow that, it was massacres of Iranians in mass graves again. The history is repeating itself of the 80s. The assassination of dissent in Europe, in London, in Berlin, and in Paris. And it was those activities that actually brought global sanctions, multilateral sanctions by the UN upon Iran in 2006. So as Iranians and as economies affecting everyone, those backgrounds are really important to understand. And that's why the argument that sanctions is the reason we're in this place is actually majority wrong, because you're not really going to root cause. In terms of the economic factor, of course, Atbin will go through it, but it's that the biggest element here is that people are getting poorer. I'm speaking to people who are unable to afford anything beyond dried bread. And this is a country that has 10 times resources per capita. We're one of the richest countries in terms of per person. So it's direct mismanagement of resources that is affecting people. So it's from economy, from religion, from basic freedoms, that is bringing us to this part.
And it's all because they're pursuing this crazy abroad policy of terrorism and malign activities around the world.
It's the caliphate, is the Islamic caliphate that they're following, which is why they're part of this Islam Brotherhood, which they're going for a global Islamic states. So and that's what they're investing their money in.
Yeah, because from the regime's point of view, they don't really recognize their own country's borders. They just see themselves as being the center of a future global domination of their own version of millenarian Islamic cultishness.
They don't recognize not just their own country's borders, but their own countrymen and citizens, countrymen and women and citizens. They don't care about Iranians. They don't care about. They try to erase Persian history, our identity, our culture. They've tried to destroy our monuments, our UNESCO sites that we have, the Takht Jamshid or Persepolis, which was built by Darius the Great and burnt by Alexander. The key is, and it's kind of what you both mentioned, and I spoke to James O'Brien from LBC a few months ago when the Iran-Israel conflict took place, and to kind of describe in simplified terms the sort of foundation upon which the Islamic regime is built, and there's sort of three pillars, and one of which is this it's a mafia, it's a group of mafia families that have taken a country hostage, and that mafia pillar is embezzlement, one of which is to embezzle all of the assets and the wealth and the abundance of natural resources that Iran has, and line their own pockets, and their children and grandchildren are living lavish lives in Europe and in North America. And the other pillar is to propagate and promote their Shia Islamist extremist fundamental principles, or lack thereof principles, and spread this sort of state-sponsored terrorism. And we see effects of it here with the Islamic centers that we have here in North London and the Ayatollah's office. And the third, and perhaps the most brutal, is the suppression of any sort of defiance or dissidence, and the surveillance on the Iranian people, and how much the regime invests in surveying and monitoring the Iranian people and suppressing any potential dissidents or any opposition, like my own cousin who spent time in Evin prison, where political prisoners are held, when Nazanin and Ratcliffe were held for, I think, 6 years. So these are the sort of three pillars upon which the Islamic regime is built, and none of it is in the benefit of the Iranian people. Well, actually, on the contrary, it's to the detriment of the Iranian people and Iranian culture, but also to the global population. When you look at the state-sponsored terrorism and what that does with Hamas has been supported by the Islamic regime. We know that, and other organizations.
It's interesting because talking about the charm offensive that the regime embarks upon towards journalists. I mean, I remember a few years ago when I was a foreign reporter, having a lot of meetings at the regime's embassy because I was trying to get access to report in Iran, and there were other journalists there. I remember seeing Jon Snow there from Channel 4 having what looked like quite a friendly meeting there, and they were trying to allow me into Iran to report, but only on the skiing nearby Tehran. That was what they wanted me to report upon. Obviously, I didn't do it, but there's a flip side, isn't there, of the machinery of suppression and terror against dissidents and Iranian citizens in Britain. Have you experienced any of that repression here in Britain? If you've been enjoying the conversation so far, don't panic. To catch the rest of the episode, just head over to our Substack at thebrinkpodcast.co.uk.